Hey guys, it's Boban and I'm back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be doing a drawing of one of my characters. This is a additional demonstration for a Patreon exclusive tutorial. Thank you to the Patreon subs, and here we go! When we're drawing figures, we need some definite points to reference to plot onto the page so that we know where different pieces of the figure are. So if we start with, okay, I'm going to plot the arm in. That doesn't really work because the arm is made up of muscle and flesh, and that really does not act as a good reference point because they are malleable and movable, the shape changes. But if you look deeper, you have the scaffolding underneath, which is the skeleton, and that is what dictates where these muscles move and what sorts of shapes they make. The skeleton is a solid, articulated, but not malleable structure that we can start to hang everything else on top of. We also know that skeletons are symmetrical, so that gives us a lot of room to block down midlines and also angles that everything sits at. So you might be able to see some of the underlying structure in my sketch, but we can put in shoulder, the rib cage, angle of the hips, and you should be able to see as well the midline that I have down here. Let's put the bottom of the hips in too. I can also pull down this midline on the head and twist it around to give myself an idea of what sort of pose I have going on. And let's block in some more of the structure of the bigger parts of the skeleton. So we've got the ribs, the skull, and the pelvis. You can also add the spine through the back as well, even though we don't see it. There are a few more angles as well that I like to block in my sketches to get the placement of more of the details on the limbs. If I add some quick notes in for the arms and the legs, then you can see how all of these bones fit in here quite snugly because I have thought about those during the process and fit the rest of the muscle and bone around them. Because I've worked from that solid structure and then added all the skin and muscle on the top, that has given me a nice solid structure and my skeleton fits snugly into the silhouette. I'm also going to clean this skeleton up so that you can see it more clearly in these two colors. I'm trying to keep this in the same style as the sheet and PSD file that you get with the full tutorial on Patreon, with a whole bunch of other poses that are annotated in the same way. I do have other pose sheets available for purchase on the Patreon shop also. They are not annotated like this, but this tutorial is intended to help you understand my shorthand for blocking those down. Where it can be quite difficult to block in a figure, especially when you're trying to maintain that symmetry and also account for the muscle movement and the fat squish, keeping the structure of the skeleton underneath should keep you a bit more on track so that you don't lose any of that and end up with things that are either sort of too wide or out of place. So a lot of the time I am thinking about these markers as I'm drawing, especially where I usually work on the flow of the pose first. So earlier on in the time lapse you would have seen me working on a looser sketch and slowly tidying that up and adjusting it to the shape of the character and bringing in more of that structure underneath. With more flowy poses like this, I usually work in that direction, so it's the concept, the flow, the movement first, and then I will start to work in more structure. And then it's a case of trying to balance those two things out. I think I did lose a bit of the flow that I wanted in this one. It's sort of close to where I was going. I started off with half of the body as a sketch at the start and then extended it through into something that would make a more full illustration that I could use as an example. I think I could have tried twisting the figure a little bit more on this one because the whole point of this character is that she's built very cat-like and has a shorter ribcage to accommodate more movement. But I wanted to make sure it wasn't too vicious also of a pose for this demonstration. I've got another video where I drew a lot of her that I will put a link to now as well, where the pose, it's a handstand, it's a lot more vicious of a pose. But you can see the same sketch process on that one. I go more specifically into the bones in that sketch if you want to see that. But since then I've been working more consistently on drawing skeletons, and of course I've got an OC that is literally just a haunted skeleton to force myself to draw. Another thing I wanted to test out on this one too was, you can see the little JoJo fan art that I did down in the bottom left. I wanted to lean more into that style of heavier line art again, so that's what I'll be going forward with on this one shortly. And also that style of cell shading in the one that I did for the last video from last month. I wanted to do something more rendery. I didn't have time on this one, so I decided to go more with that style. This is something I want to lean back into because I've been doing mostly thinner line art recently. Some of my other goals are, like in the previous video, I mentioned I've been working more on skinnier female figures because I tend to lean into where a lot of the curves are and lumps and bumps and all of the small undulations you get in a figure, because I find the form and the flow really interesting, but it's a lot more difficult when they are not so obviously curvy and you can see more of that skeletal structure. That's why I've been leaning into this more, and that's what my recent sheets of figure poses are. I will be working on other figures in the future, like men and couples and things like that. Different body shapes. This is something I specifically wanted to focus on now as well. Earlier before that, I was doing more skinny men as well. Both are native, leaning closer into these skeletal annotations. I will be doing a video soon on anatomy resources that I recommend. I've been researching a few different things for that, so expect me to be posting something possibly around Christmas that covers that. Along with another nice big time lapse of me drawing my skeleton lady also. If anybody has other recommendations for anatomy reference, either websites or books, I would very much like to hear about it. I am hoarding a set of them slowly and working on, I suppose, small reviews for them. I will most likely do separate reviews for the Morpho books as well. I've bought a few of those because I have been eyeing them up for many years. I've purchased about 4 of them that are in topics that I'm interested in going further into and eventually making some tutorials on. So I want to see if there is anything in there that I'm currently missing that I can learn from. Just in general also, I would be interested to hear if anyone has suggestions for tutorials they'd like to see. There's a lot of anatomy things that I can split up into separate topics, much like this one, that I would like to do longer tutorials on. And a lot of smaller, simpler things, or just motivation things in general that I would like to talk about. I feel like at this stage I'm starting to slowly forget what my early progress was like as I'm getting further into learning and the steep learning curve is starting to flatten out and plateau. And that is something I really don't want to lose a grip on because I feel like that makes me a lot less helpful. I almost regret that I didn't journal about the way I was working on my art early on and the sort of struggles that I was fighting with. When I see someone else express what problems they're having and what struggles they're going through with it, it makes it easier for me to remember. But in my own brain, all of that is starting to fade at this point. And I would really like to continue to be helpful, so please share with me what you're interested in hearing me talk about, or what sort of struggles you're having, what sort of process you've gone through with your art. Anyway, where am I up to with this? I am nearly done with the line art. What I decided to do, like I say, was make this cel shaded so that it wouldn't take quite so long. And all of my line art is chunkier so that I can use that in place of the darker shadows. I've got a line art tutorial on YouTube actually that's just available that I will put a link to now as well, where I talk about values a bit more and how they relate to line art and how you can use them differently. I'm going to try something different with the way that I'm lining the hair as well, where I will just shadow the underside of a flip on it and then leave a gap in any other line art where it crosses over it, so that's just where the light's going to sit, or where the colour's going to sit, and it won't have any other line art touch it. Now I don't usually do that kind of broken line art because I really like being able to select everything very tidy and not have to go over it and adjust the flat layer in terms of shape. I like to do one selection, invert it, and fill it in because it's very convenient and fast, but oh, it does look cool. It kind of looks cool, and I'm gonna have to try doing it more, I think. I did it slightly on the small JoJo one that I had in the corner a second ago, and I really, really like the way that it looks on hair. I sort of wonder if you could do that with fabric textures maybe, but it might depend if it was more ribbony like hair or not. That's something I need to investigate. Like, different ways to line things and texture things is not really something that I do very much because I'm not much into the heavy line art, I don't think. Or I like doing it kind of chunky like this, but not hatching. Onto the colours now, so I'm just going to shade this loose. I actually ended up shading her face a bit too much, so I bring that in later, but I'm also trying to keep the blocks that I noted down for the pelvis and the ribcage very apparent in the way that I'm lighting this, so that light from the bottom is going to hit on the chin, edge of the chin, bottom of the ribcage, and around the hips. And also on the knees and the legs, which is important in some more of my tutorial. I also really like lighting the underside of the hands, so you get that split in the form. It's like a flipper, almost. That's one of my favourite things to do. I really enjoy that. I do get a bit out of hand with the colours on this one. It starts to lean more into where I do want to paint it, because I was having a lot of fun with the colours, but eventually I calm down a little bit and don't go so far. I do some more edits on the face later just to adjust it at the final stage, and a lot of blur to soften the edges out. A lot of the skeletal annotation that I've been over as well really plays into how you shade something, because if you can't spot where it is subcutaneous and block that down, you're going to have a lot of trouble with the forms and, like I say, hanging the skin and fat and flesh off of those structures. Gotta know where it attaches to be having it sloughing off like that. Now I'm getting into the effects, so adding in more gradients and lighting. I did initially have this nice shape that I really like the look of with sort of a magic swoosh. I've been working on some magic poses for my pose sets actually. That's one of the ones I'm going to put up, and I don't know if I'll use this one now because I have tidied it up. I guess I could go over the rest of the pose and add that one into a sheet if people are interested. But I have this almost figure 8 infinity sign going on with the way that it's wrapping around the arms. That was something that I wanted to play up, but I also tried to bring that down into the skirt at the bottom so that I could mirror the shape and continue it up from the top to the bottom so they would link together in the composition. I do think she's starting to look a little bit like a Christmas tree with the way that I've done that, you know, when people do the sort of figure 8 shape in a big swoosh and then turn it into a Christmas tree, put a little star on the top. She kind of looks like that. I suppose I'm not too offended by it though. It's a nice shape. Anything that aids in the composition and the way that you look at the image and follow the lines around, just slap it on. Just slap it on, bro. Now I'm into my final little details, so I'm doing my overpaint on this as usual to get a bit more adjustments into the face or any of the clothes, anywhere that I think I need it. I did a few more little bits of spray around from those magic effects. And I'm also going to desaturate it and just soften it out a little bit. Everything gets way too saturated when I start playing with colours. These are some of my favourites, especially that pink and green gradient in the design. Where I didn't want to spend the time painting this either, I decided to go for more heavy blur around the edges to fade her out. I did try sort of a blue shadow over the top at one point, but it made it look like it was underwater, especially with that blur on the top. It just looked a bit out of place. There is some old art that I worked on a while ago that was just colouring of some lines that I had for a commission. I'm going to ask if I have permission to talk about those in a video, because I think they would be interesting for something as well. Working on this one actually reminded me of doing those. It was things that I did for Madara a little while ago. But I think it would be interesting to do something on values using those, because especially with the backlighting that I have going on her, I did something very similar in those. On the final versions of these, I will show them in a second. I've got one that is clear without the blur and one that does have the blur. I'd be interested to know if you guys prefer either one of them. I did initially like the blur the best, but now I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure if I like it very much on top of line art that's quite clean. I don't think I mentioned where I've got that backlight on the shoulders a bit heavier as well, and sort of leaking that into the line art or changing the line art colour to pull that further in. That was another part of where I wanted to note down more of those bones, especially on the arm over there. I think that's quite a clear example of what I talk about. as is some of the way that it's hitting the underside of the ribcage and the hips and the knees. I did also make an attempt to put a texture on this, but it did not look good at all, so we're gonna blast it. We're gonna absolutely blast it with the blur to see if it looks cool. I'm also starting to get very worried. As I draw this character, I'm thinking about stuff, and that's what I was doing with my skeleton lady, because she's a whole comic now, so I'm starting to wonder what's gonna happen with this one. Is she gonna turn into something? I'm gonna have to stew on it. Anyway, there we go, we're done. Here is another quick time lapse of the whole process, along with both versions of the clearer one and the one with the blur on top. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped. If it did, give us a like, share if you think it'll help someone else, and subscribe for new videos when I have them. I will put a link again to the Patreon tutorial that ties in with this video, and thanks for watching. Goodbye! Do you guys like my Halloween costume, by the way?